This is why we say that God has something to do with everything, but not everything to do with everything. Some events he causes, and some he permits. Another way to say this is that whatever happens is the will of God, but not in the same sense of the term that the Calvinists would say is causing everything that happens. Some things happen in accordance to God's purposeful will. Other things happen because that God causes it, and some because he permits it. It is his purposeful will to accomplish the redemption through Jesus Christ. No, you're right. I mean, that's exactly where I'm going next.
Yeah,
I'll sequitur right into you then.
Yeah, that's a perfect lead in. So, as you pointed out, certainly Calvinistic views, this determinism stems from the absolute emphasis on the sovereignty of God, that God is sovereign and we cannot affect his sovereignty in any way. And that's where this view of God predetermines every aspect of all our lives, including planning thoughts that we don't have control over. So it makes it feel or seem like it's free will, but it's not really.
Right.
And so it's a very, very dangerous and unscriptural perspective. And we can go into that, and we're going to touch on a little bit of that later on. But ultimately, it's a very dangerous view. When we think about God's providence of how he works within his creation, he works providentially. We're going to talk about miracles next. He works providentially, and there is a sense that in his creation, there's a relative independence of his creation. He is still sovereign, but he enables his creation to work independently in the physics and the laws. That's a natural independence, but also in our personal choices and free will. And but it doesn't eliminate his sovereignty, in that he can still at any point take that away. I forget the passage now in Colossians. It says the word of God upholds and sustains all of God's creation. And so at any time, he can take that away. So he's still sovereign, but we still have a degree of independence, but it doesn't eliminate his sovereignty. So that's the point number one with providence. Okay. Point number two goes with exactly what you're talking about, and that's divine self-limitation. God has free will. We already talked about this when we talked about in God's creative acts, and that he has the free will to create and the free will not to create, the free will to create anything, but he chose to create this world, which also implies, tells us that he has not only the power to do it, but the wisdom, the omniscience to create what is best. God cannot do anything because of his very essence. He is righteous in all his ways. He can create something that would not be righteous. But he created, if God can create every possible scenario that you can imagine or anyone else can imagine, God certainly can imagine more. But he chose this scenario, this world that we live in which we have free will. And he has free will to make that creation. As a free act, creation was not something God had to do, but when he did choose to do it, he limited himself in the same way that you and I limit ourselves when we choose to get a pet. I want this dog, or I want this cat. I don't want a dog, I want a cat. I want this dog and not that dog. I don't like that cat, I want this cat. Or when we buy a car, I like this color, I like this model. Or we buy a house, or we get married, I choose this wife or this husband. Or I choose to have children. I choose not to have. I choose how many children I'm going to have. And so, in the similar way, I wouldn't say it's the same because I don't know the mind of God. But in a similar way, God has free will to choose, and he has free will to limit his choices, just like we have free will to limit our choices. When we make these decisions, we accept certain responsibilities and commit ourselves to act in certain ways based on the decisions we make, right? I make a decision to get married. I now have a responsibility and a commitment to my spouse. That's a choice I made that now results in a commitment and responsibility and I'm accountable for that choice and for the way I act within that choice. Such choice is self-limiting. I made that choice, and I limit myself to the consequences of that choice. And since we don't have to make any choice, these choices are limiting. They're self-limiting. The decision to create was such a choice for God. Though he was free to act when he created the universe, he brought something into existence, and he's now responsible for and has an obligation to relate to his creation. It's within his being, within his essence. Some might think that the very suggestion, one second, some might think the very suggestion of divine limitation is sort of an assault upon the sovereignty of God. That's what Calvinists would look at. Oh, you're going to limit God. You're taking away his sovereignty. No, that's not correct. Let me just bring out this point. I'll open it up for two reasons. Number one, first, divine self-limitation does not diminish God's sovereignty because he's freely chosen it himself. Before God made this particular world, he knew the possible options that could be made, and he chose this one instead of all the others. He knew all possible things that might happen in this world, in this kind of world, versus other kinds of world. But this is the one he made, and he did so voluntarily, freely accepting all the limitations associated with it. Truly, this is not a violation of divine sovereignty, but an expression of his sovereignty. You see, we're not violating the sovereignty of God, but it's expressing his sovereignty in his choice. Secondly, the reason why the self-limitation doesn't violate God's sovereignty is that he reserves the right and has the power to intervene in the course of nature, in the course of human decision-making, anytime he wants. Take away his sovereignty, most of the time he does not intervene, but sometimes he does. Thus, God still has ultimate word in everything. He's still sovereign. And here's the difference. This is a significant difference between Calvinism and biblical view of sovereignty. The ability to intervene or not to intervene is called sovereign control, and the key word is control. Where the Calvinists interpret sovereignty in terms of causation, the biblical perspective of sovereignty is control. God has control over everything. That's to say, his sovereign control of this universe means that he is in control over everything that happens, even though he doesn't cause everything to happen. That's the big difference. That God exercises sovereign control in his providence means that his hand is indeed in everything that happens in one or two ways, and that is maybe he causes it or maybe he permits it. We can't deny that God directly causes some things to happen in accordance with his purpose, right? The plan of salvation, the ultimate will of God, is to return his creation back to paradise, back to him in a relationship, a right relationship with him. That's his ultimate will. And throughout history, mankind leading up to Jesus Christ, he caused whatever was necessary to work out his plan of salvation. He causes things to happen to carry out his judgments, his temporal judgments, his judgments on this earth, and ultimately the final judgment, on his enemies, on the enemies of Israel. He causes blessings to fall upon his people. He also causes discipline to fall upon his people. He especially is associated with answering prayer. The other way that God expresses his sovereign control is by permitting whatever he doesn't cause. In God's omniscience, he knows everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen. In his foreknowledge, he could see history unfold before it ever existed, according to the workings of natural law, according to free will of humanity. And so he can sort of oversee, monitor the cosmos, the creation, keeps his finger on the delete key, as if it were, in order to permit a particular thing to happen, or to intervene, or to prevent it from happening if he chooses. Such intervention in order to prevent something from happening is another example of the way God acts in the universe. Thus, he could say either go or no go by permitting or preventing something. This is why we say that God has something to do with everything. but not everything to do with everything. Some events he causes, and some he permits. Another way to say this is that whatever happens is the will of God, but not in the same sense of the term that the Calvinists would say is causing everything that happens. Some things happen in accordance to God's purposeful will. Other things happen because that God causes it, and some because He permits it. It is His purposeful will to accomplish the redemption through Jesus Christ that will not be thwarted. God's purpose will is done through His special providence and intervention in history, which we're going to go to in a minute. So whatever happens is not caused. Whatever happens that is not caused by God is, in terms of His purposeful will, is nevertheless the will of God in the sense of His permissive will. I learned it this way in school. I don't know if you have this in hospitals where you're at, Ferdinand or Epi or Calix. You have an ICU in the hospital, where intensive care unit, where somebody needs special care, intensive care.
We do.
Okay, so ICU can also mean the intentional will of God, the conditional will of God, and the ultimate will of God. That's how I remember it. So you have the intentional will of God, and I don't remember all the passages, but I'm pretty sure 2 Peter 3 verse 2 Peter 3 verse 8 or 9. It reflects the intentional will of God. It's not desire. God doesn't desire that any perish. And that's His intention. But we can thwart, we can reject His intentional will. You also have His conditional will. You know, the law of Moses and the promise of Israel, the land of promise for Israel, the plan of salvation, the plan of eternal life in paradise, those are conditional. If you choose based on God's condition, He sets the conditions. If you choose and follow the conditions, then He will bless you in those particular events. That's a conditional will. But His ultimate, and we can thwart His conditional will. We can thwart, we can reject His intentional will, His conditional will, but we cannot thwart or reject His ultimate will, and that is God's plan, His redemptive plan for humanity, and bringing Christ and Christ's second coming, which all will be judged. We cannot thwart that. All will be judged. Every knee will bow. Every eye will see. So whatever happens, it's not caused by God in terms of His purposeful will. Is enabled by God, nevertheless, the will of God through His permissive will. He allows it to occur. This includes most things which take place in what we mentioned earlier, relative independence of the natural law and free will. Such things such as sin, such as the will of God in the sense that He allows them to happen. Could God stop sin? Sure. But God who knows the best of every possible created world, created a world that sin is allowed to happen, because ultimately we live in this world that will eventually be destroyed, and we in this world make the choice to choose to love God in a manner that's aligned with His will. And there's a big difference.